Welcome to the 33rd Hayley-Roxanna Crafts quick cross-stitch video, where I share information, hints and tips on one area of cross-stitch in a short video. In this video, I am focusing on cross-stitching tips for beginners. Starting any new craft can be daunting as well as exciting, so I thought it would be helpful to share a few tips based on questions I often see from beginners, as well as tips I remember being given when I started cross-stitching. There are also many videos in my quick cross-stitch videos playlist that may be helpful to beginners alongside these tips. Whilst there are many cross-stitching accessories you can buy, for someone just starting out, I would advise just to get a small, simple kit, even one that's aimed at children, that you can easily hold in hand to try. A kit will usually contain the pattern, the cross-stitching fabric, known as Ada or Aida, the threads that you will need, and a needle. So all you will need to find is some scissors and you're all set to go. If you want to spend maybe a little bit more, it's probably worth buying a cross-stitch magazine such as The World of Cross-Stitching. These often come with a small kit as a free gift that are perfect for beginners. This also means that as well as having everything you need to try cross-stitching, you will also have a magazine that will contain more hints and tips and guides that will help you. The other advantage to starting out with a kit is that you don't need to worry about knowing about counts of cross-stitching fabrics, the different brands of thread available, or the different needle sizes, as all of that will have been sorted for you in the kit. When it comes to the scissors you'll need, you do not need to worry about buying any expensive or fancy or even proper embroidery scissors like these ones. Just a simple pair of scissors that you can get from a stationery store quite cheaply will do. I would suggest buying scissors especially for your cross-stitching, especially if it's something you are going to continue with. But again, it doesn't have to be embroidery scissors. It can just be a pair of scissors like this that you can pick up for a couple of pounds at a stationery store. When I first started cross-stitching, and even for the first few years of cross-stitching, when I started taking my cross-stitching more seriously, I used a pair of scissors just like these for quite a number of years before I decided to actually get some proper embroidery scissors. So they're absolutely fine to use. Just don't cut paper with them, as you want them nice and sharp for cutting your threads and fabric. Before starting a cross-stitch project, I would advise reading the instructions that come with it thoroughly and carefully first. This applies to kits as well as patterns sold in other forms. The instructions included will often tell you information about the number of strands to use in the design, amongst other things. Beginners are often unaware that the thread is stranded cotton made up of 6 strands. Just unwind this. Can show you. See, it's made up of strands. And this is very rare for all 6 strands to be used at the same time in cross-stitching. Generally, 2 strands are used for cross-stitches and 1 strand for back-stitching. But this can vary, particularly on more complex designs, where it is even more important to read the instructions first and keep referring back to them as you work on your project. This will help to make sure you don't run out of thread when using a kit, as well as ensuring that you end up with a finished cross-stitch that looks similar to the picture you saw of it that made you want to stitch it in the first place. You will often hear cross-stitchers talk about starting from the middle when starting a cross-stitch project. For beginners, this may seem like a strange place to start, but it is the best way to ensure that your finished cross-stitch will actually fit onto the fabric. There is nothing worse than having a piece of fabric that your cross-stitch is going to fit on, that's been measured for your cross-stitch to fit on, only to find that because you started a bit too low down or a bit too far to the right, that you're then running out of space when you need it, but there's plenty of room on the opposite side. Starting in the centre can mean different things for different stitchers. For some, it literally means finding the middle of the fabric, usually by folding it in half horizontally and vertically to make a little crease to find the centre. It's a bit hard to see on camera, but that helps you to find the centre of your fabric. And then literally starting with the stitch that is right at the centre of the pattern. For others, me included, when I'm starting at the centre, it does mean finding the middle of the fabric, but then I will count out from the middle to where I actually want to start stitching. And whilst I'm on the subject of counting to where you want to start stitching, any counting in cross stitch, it is always best to count twice, stitch once. This is advice you will often hear from cross stitchers as a way to try to minimise errors from counting. I can be a bit extreme when it comes to counting and recounting to ensure that I am stitching in the correct place. I will often count more than once on my pattern, and then I will count on my fabric more than once. I will put the needle in where I think I need to be, and I will count again, and I will even count to the same place from multiple areas that I've already stitched on my project, especially as a project progresses, to double check that I'm in the correct place. But you do want to be careful with your counting to try and make sure that you're accurate. The different methods for securing your thread, both before and after stitching, can be overwhelming for beginners. You will hear of things of waist knots and loop starts and all sorts of things that can just feel a bit too much. What I would say is, and this may horrify some cross stitchers, there is nothing wrong with using knots in your cross stitching, especially when you are learning. You just want to make sure that your knots are not too big. So I've knotted the end of my thread. If I can show you. Just a very small knot just to help to secure my thread. This size would be absolutely fine. As you progress, you can learn about the other methods of securing your thread and try them out to see if they work for you. But I will admit that I still use knots in my cross stitching. I don't see any harm in it as long as you keep them small as you possibly can. When it comes to making your cross stitches, my best tip for beginners is to ensure all the bottom stitches of your crosses go in one direction and all the top stitches go in the other. So you could do your stitches so that the bottom stitch goes left to right and the top stitch goes right to left, or you could do the bottom stitch right to left and the top stitch left to right. Either way is acceptable. You just need to be consistent in which you're using to make your finished cross stitch look the best it can. But you also don't have to always do your stitches from the bottom to the top. So to do a stitch exactly the same as this, where I've done the bottom left to right, I could do it coming in from the top and going down. And then to replicate the other stitch, where the bottom goes from right to left when I'm going from the bottom. If I was coming from the top, I'd go from the left to the right. So these two stitches are exactly the same, and these two stitches look the same, even though they weren't quite stitched in the same way. It also doesn't matter if you want to make each stitch one at a time, or if you want to do all the bottoms of a row or area and then all the tops. It's about finding out what works best for you. I have found that beginners will often mark their fabric to help them with knowing where to stitch, and this is absolutely fine to do. However, I would strongly advise against using ordinary pens and pencils to do this, as they can be difficult to remove from the fabric when your cross stitch is finished. If you want to mark your fabric, use a pen or pencil that's made for marking fabric, that can wash out or be heat erased when you have finished. And you can even use ordinary heat erasable pens, such as like friction pens or something like this, because these will heat erase when you have finished. But I would advise to test them on the edge or the back of a fabric first, somewhere that you won't be able to see once you've finished your design, just to make sure that the marks will erase properly when heat is applied. The most important thing I will tell beginners to cross stitching is to take your time, but don't worry about making mistakes. No matter how careful you are or how experienced you become, you will still make mistakes. Just take a breath, carefully undo it, and try again. If you have any questions about cross stitching or any tips that you would give a beginner, please pop them in the comments. In the next quick cross stitch video, I will share some tips to help when counting when cross stitching.